move on, Keith, and talk about Chelsea. Now, they're actually back in the race for European qualification, it looks like now. How much of a boost is that going to be for the club from a financial perspective? They are to qualify for European football next season.
I don't think it'll be any boost at all to be in the smaller European competitions. It's going to be very hard for them. And it also then means the Thursday, Sunday routine, which is notoriously unhelpful for the squad. I really don't think, I mean, it'll give the owners a bit of a fig leaf in terms of their season, football-wise, performance-wise, but certainly it won't help at all in terms of the financial benefits. In some of these competitions, you're not making any money at all unless you actually reach the final. So from Chelsea's point of view, yes, they can say they're going back into Europe, which, by the way, was not looking very likely until a few weeks ago, as you said. But they can say that they've achieved that, and that's probably a good one for Pochettino to say that. But overall, financially, I'm afraid, no, it's not the great solution at all.
So does that then mean, Keith, that paying off transfer debt actually won't benefit them at all if they are to get European football? It will have no impact in any way.
Yeah, exactly. I think it'll be that they've got bigger problems to fry, and that Europe is not the solution to those problems. They've got to find ways around that, and I think it's got to be player sales. It's got to be the way forward.
And in terms of their summer spending, Keith, both from an incomings and outgoings point of view, I mean, you'd argue that big names are more likely to stay. Are we still expecting big sales then at Stamford Bridge going into the summer?
I think we have to. I think, from what I can see, they've run out of hotels to sell, although that has still to be finally approved by the Premier League, is my understanding. And so at some stage, I'm afraid it's got to be. And it's where there's value in players, and those tend to be the younger ones, actually, not necessarily the big names. I see Thiago Silva has said he's not going to be returning. I don't know what his wages would have been, but I mean, they'll be substantial, obviously. So they've got to be doing some pruning around that player budget. And I expect it to be pretty dramatic at some stage, because it's hard to see how they can't go on unless, of course, we have a complete rejigging of the system for next season. So there's so many open questions there that, hey, it's the game of football, the great soap opera we love, but how they dig themselves out of this mess will be interesting.
And Keith, what other issues? I mean, you mentioned in there just before about so they will have bigger issues to deal with. What are some of those, please? And actually, how much of a concern is this for Chelsea fans going into the summer that actually they might have to sell some top talent?
Well, it is just the amount of spending that's been done and the costs that they've incurred, different managers coming in. In many ways, you can compare it to Everton when there were so many managers came in and wanted new players and squads, and so money was spent and not necessarily it was spent well. I think Chelsea have been underwhelmed by the success on the pitch, the playing styles, etc. And it is just the quantum of expenditure that's got to be handled within the rules that are set. So that's their biggest problem. I'm sure there is a great deal. Well, I understand there is unhappiness amongst the fans, certainly in terms of ticket prices, all sorts of things in Stamford Bridge. I've seen a lot of photographs of empty seats, people rejecting the cost increases. Whether that's true, I'm pretty sure that the fans will confirm that there's some unrest about that. But also, I think even at the higher level, I think Todd Bowley and his partners have got to be having some pretty hard conversations with each other about how the dream is turning out and the vision that they had at the start and actually where they are now in reality a couple of seasons in. So it's there's some big pictures and some big numbers that have to be worked around.
Keith, will they deem it a success so far with their time in charge? Or actually, do you think they're going to see it as more of a learning curve to improve? Where do you think Bowley and his team will stand from that perspective?
There's no doubt they will point to the fact it was a learning curve, and now they understand more. There was unforeseen circumstances, etc. They will, all sorts of things will be put in their injuries. That they will put that forward. I contrast it with Newcastle, which I thought was a very, very exemplary way to handle the club, where Amanda went in there for the first year, really learnt the ropes, got to feel the club, understood it properly before she went ahead and started some spending. And I think that was really the way any new owner should try and do that. The temptation, of course, is always for a new owner to come in, want to make major promises, do dramatic things, show he's the great guy, the saviour, the white knight. But the reality is a football club is a very delicate organism, and you've got to handle it with kid gloves, and you've got to learn it, understand it, know how it beats and how it breathes. and it's something that doesn't take major surgery very well. Particularly in a case of the high level clubs like Chelsea, who are used to being a rarefied atmosphere in terms of the football world. So that's going to be their debate internally. They'll obviously say they've learned a lot and things are now more stable. There's a big turnover in executive levels as well as football levels. They've now got to get stability. They've got to stick with Pochettino, in my view. They've got to stay with that, try and get things moving and get some spirit back in the club and try and get the fan base back on side. Change isn't always the key to things. Sometimes it's needed, but too much change is not great. I'm not a big fan of it in many ways. You're not often you're just buying the same problems again and spending more money to create the same problems. So you've really got to be careful. I hark back to my time at Everton. David Moyes was there for over 10 years. That stability really paid dividends, and we went through some peaks and troughs, but there's never a feeling ever to try and pull the trigger, and so that I think shows. And Ferguson at Man United, stability. Yes, there can be difficult periods in those relationships, but if you can get stability and you believe in each other as players together and workers together, you can get it done. So I would always try and seek that stability if possible.
Keith, if we talk about an issue off-field going on, they actually haven't sorted a front of shirt sponsor yet for next season. What are your thoughts on that? And are we potentially expecting an update soon from that perspective?
Well, when I saw that story, I thought, well, okay, I can imagine that they've obviously had to do a forecast of revenues for when they've brought in the money that they have done. And I would imagine, again, they would have thought things would have been going, with a bed of roses and the club would be challenging at the top. And they will have put a pretty big number on that revenue stream. And so it would be embarrassing to go back to investors with a smaller number. And so I think they're sticking out to try and get that big number. This is where signs like potential European qualification, although it's not great financially for them in the bigger picture, may help get sponsors on board. Still not quite the competitions that the big sponsors would like to see them in, but still it may help slightly. But I think it's more a case of them having made a forecast at a certain level, and they've got to show the investors that they can get somewhere near that level as well. So that's why I think it's taken so long. Spurs have also been notorious about the naming rights for the stadium and other things as well, where Daniel Levy is held out for a much bigger number than the market would expect. So it's going to be up to them to really maintain their position that they really believe the value is there, show investors the value is there, and hopefully they can try and get close to their forecast when everything was looking great.
Are they holding out, Keith, for too much money? Or actually, do you think it's fair from their perspective that their forecast might not necessarily be what they were hoping for, or at least anticipating for?
Well, I think every business, you've got to put a value on what you believe your resource is worth. Now, the market will tell you whether you're right or not. And that's what's going to happen. And so it's a case of knowledge and experience and having the right contacts. Now, I've got no doubt that they have the right contacts, but they've got to show they're delivering the right value for a potential front of shirt sponsor. Now, whether there is one in Saudi, whether there is one in other parts of the world, in the Middle East, etc., or North America, that may be, but they've got to go and find them and show somebody that the value is there. I think we've all seen in the media recently, Chelsea have not been covered in really, great football stories. There's been stories of disquiet, there's been stories of upset. And so, there have been a few shining lights in there. But overall, if you're a potential sponsor and you're scanning your press clippings, you're not seeing a really great story that you want to be attached to. So hopefully things will change for them. And next season, things can start fresh with a bit of stability. And then we can start to see if they can get the right marketplace moving for them on the shirt side.